under those conditions to hold a legitimate ballot was beyond anyone, but they attempted anyway. But if that first round was fraudulent, the second round is certainly going to be a joke. Let's face it, the two candidates, Michel Martelly received only 4.5% of the vote, Melan Manigat only 6.4% of the vote. There's no way that this can at all realize a mandate for a leadership that Haiti desperately needs to lead it forward at this period. So in the midst of this picture that you've just painted, this poll is going to take place on March the 20th. It is possible that the former president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, will fly back to Haiti before the election. How is that going to add to this sort of volatile political mix, then, of this situation on the ground? Well, I think that it's going to add some reality. I think that P.J. Crowley, State Department spokesperson, and Susan Rice and the Obama administration in general live on the moon when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. And their approach to Haiti, they do not live in reality. And the reality is that you cannot move that country forward while Jean-Bertrand Aristide remains in exile. There's no way that that country can heal. The major rift between its political factions, there is no one who can unify the Haitian people at this moment in history more so than Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Now, of course, there are great obstacles to his returning. We know that the Obama administration are making a lot of noises. There are threats against the South African government. There are threats against his allies in the region, such as the Venezuelan government, to put pressure not to allow him to return. That was Kevin Pina talking to me a little while ago. At least 8 people are reported dead after a shootout between 2 rival drug gangs in the Mexican city of Acapulco. The gunfire erupted as one group attacked taxi drivers associated with another gang. 6 cars were incinerated and 2 of the victims are said to have been burned to death in their vehicles. The 2 gangs were reportedly battling for control of the local drug market. In Peru, a bus has crashed near the southern city of Arequipa, killing 4 people and injuring 40 others. The accident was initially blamed on mechanical problems, but local authorities say that faulty repairs to the bus's steering caused it to veer off a highway. An investigation is underway. And that's it from the Americas. Now back to Tamor in Doha.
Now, France has kicked off its presidency of the G20 group of nations with a warning from President Nicolas Sarkozy. He said that national interests must be put to one side if the organization is to succeed. Sarkozy went on to remind finance ministers gathered in Paris of the challenges facing them. They're embarking on a weekend of negotiations over so-called indicative guidelines. These are aimed at signaling the imbalances that could threaten individual economies and global stability.
Since last year, the recovery has begun. It's faster than foreseen, but it's unequal. It's not sufficient enough to bring unemployment rates down. Coordination is, and we have to understand this, the only way we will be able to tackle unemployment. It's our only hope. There's no alternative choice.
Well, China appears to be ignoring Sarkozy's call. It has rejected plans to use real exchange rates and currency reserves to measure global economic imbalances. That has cast some doubt over the ability of G20 members to reach any agreement during this 2-day meeting. Now, Australia's Prime Minister Julia Gillard is trying to get backing in Parliament for a new tax that would be used to pay for the clean-up after last month's record floods. Gillard says the money's needed to get the state of Queensland back on track. Andrew Thomas takes a closer look at the economic impact of the disaster.
Back in business, a month after it was 3 metres underwater, Brisbane's produce market up and running. But some fruits are in much shorter supply than they were before. Banana plantations avoided the worst of the floods, only to be devastated by Cyclone Yasi.
We've got a situation this weekend where we have the major growing area in Queensland for watermelon at Chinchilla. They're having their festival and they're having to bring watermelons up from Griffith because they don't have any watermelons.
Queensland's agricultural businesses have taken a $500 million hit, a quarter of their annual income. Consumers affected too. Bananas in Australia have doubled in price. Queenslanders have been hit in other ways too. Last December, tourist authorities brought Oprah Winfrey to the Sunshine State, hoping her millions of fans would follow. Then these pictures undid all the good work. In fact, most tourist areas were untouched by the floods, but perception matters. bookings have collapsed.
It has reduced the business of tourism in Queensland after the floods, before the cyclone, we estimated by as much as $500 million. That is money missing out of people's tills, out of the economy, out of the communities that are supported by tourism, and it's a grave concern to us.
But it's mining where the economic impact is most severe. Australia is the world's biggest coking coal exporter. Queensland's ports are operating again, but the majority of coal mines are still partly underwater. A $40 billion industry facing revenue drops of 20% and calling for a relaxation of environmental laws to fast-track their recovery.
If it was a case of taking the water in the mines and throwing it over the wall and getting on with production, then you'd be back into production much more quickly. But in Australia, in Queensland, you have to go to the environmental regulator, explain your situation, seek special approval to get rid of this water over and above their normal conditions.
On world markets, short-term coking coal prices have leapt by a third. That will feed into steel prices and impact on final goods worldwide. As for Australia, the overall impact of the floods has been to wipe 1.5% of 6 months' worth of national output. A proposed flood levy tax will hit almost every Australian. Queensland's floods and storms were unprecedented in their severity and their duration, but those they affected directly were relatively few in number. Their economic consequences, though, are being felt right across Australia and right around the world. Andrew Thomas, AlJazeera, Brisbane.
Japan's whaling fleet is heading home after its annual whale hunt was cut short by almost a month. The government says it's because of harassment by the anti-whaling group Sea Shepherd. Veronica Pedroza has the details.
With light beams and smoke canisters, Japan's whaling season comes to an abrupt halt. And now it's official.
For the safety of our fleet, we regret that we have to end the whale hunting survey.
The whaling boats had already suspended the hunt, turned around and headed home after being hounded by a hard-line anti-whaling group. Boats from the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society had been chasing the leading ship, throwing flares and stink bombs.
It's regretful that these disruptive activities took place. So from our point of view, we would like to make sure such things don't happen in the future.
The Japanese boats are allowed to hunt for what they say are scientific purposes. But critics point out the whale meat not used for study is sold for people to eat in Japan. So they say the real reason is profit.
The key here is an economic one. We have to sink the Japanese whaling fleet economically. We have to bankrupt them. And after 6 years, that's exactly what's happening. We come down here every year stronger. They come down here every year weaker. And we're going to drive them out of the sanctuary.
Japan's decision to end the whaling season early's already been welcomed by another government.
In the view of the Australian government, it's not time to celebrate until we get a decision from Japan that they are stopping whaling for good.
And there's a potentially